We all have a story, but most of us don't know how to use it to support our business. Today's guest, Jude Charles, understands how to use stories to scale. Jude is an entrepreneur, filmmaker, and consultant who helps other entrepreneurs leverage the power of their experiences. He tells us what most people get wrong about stories and why they impact the way clients perceive you, what it takes to navigate through burnout, and more.
When we talked, you had gone back and told me how you got going in your business, which I thought was like a really cool story in itself. I thought maybe that would be a cool way to just start off our conversation.
Sure. I was 17 years old in a TV production classroom in high school when my teacher, Mrs. Donnelly, pulled me to the front and she said to me, "You should start a business." And I looked at her funny. I didn't give her an answer, yes or no. I just looked at her funny because I'm the last of 10 children. My father was a construction worker. My mom worked at a chair factory. I had no idea what it meant to be an entrepreneur, but the following day, May 5th, 2006, Mrs. Donnelly handed me a yellow envelope. And inside of the yellow envelope was my first set of business cards, which I still have to this day. That still sits on my desk, but that is what she gave me, and that's how I got started in business in 2006, creating videos for other people. Now, at that time, I wasn't doing videos for entrepreneurs. I wasn't doing documentaries for entrepreneurs, but I was doing like birthday parties and small weddings, but that's how I got started.
Did you ever think before that that was something that you might do professionally, or, that you'd be interested in pursuing as a career?
Not at all. I think I knew that I wanted to be in broadcasting because I had played around with the camera and I really liked it. So in my mind, I would go to school to be in broadcast and just be a camera operator on a TV show or the news station. That was literally the first job I ever wanted, was to work at the news station in broadcast. But I never imagined that I would be running my own business. Like, that had never crossed my mind until Mrs. Donnelly said it to me. And even then, I didn't look it up. I didn't look up like running your own video production business. I didn't look up what it means to be an entrepreneur. I just was like, okay, she said all I needed was business cards and I had a video camera, so I ran with it.
So what was the process like? My impression is it wasn't always easygoing, especially in those first years. So
not at all. My first 5 years, I completely bombed. I didn't know how to market and sell myself. So I worked with this client. Her name was Keisha Dior. And Keisha was building her business from the ground up. It was a cosmetic business. And this was like 4 years into the business, for me at least. And she came to me wanting to do vlog videos. And I was just like, I don't want to do that. But here's an idea I have for a documentary. And I pitched her the idea. She said yes. So we filmed it for 6 months. But I only got paid for that documentary $3,000 to film for 6 months. So if you divide that by 6, 3,000 divided by 6, it's $500 a month. At the end of the first year of Keisha running her business, Keisha had made $1 million. And that is when the light bulb went off in my head. 5 years in business. But you know what? You do have something valuable here, Jude, but you've got to figure out how to market and sell it. The same day that Keisha called me to tell me she made $1 million was the same day I was thinking about quitting, because I woke up that morning and a tow truck driver was there to repossess my car for the second time in 8 months. But instead of quitting, I saw this opportunity that, okay, Keisha made $1 million. Let me go back and re-engineer what worked and why it worked. Instead of quitting, I decided to take a year off from the business. I still worked with Keisha Dior, but I decided to take a year off and just learn marketing and sales. I learned what it meant to follow up with clients. I learned like what value they were looking for, was the end result. But the other biggest piece, I think, is the same story I told you at the beginning of this podcast. I'd never told people when I got started or when I met them for the first time. And that's because I thought it wasn't valuable. I just thought, okay, a teacher gave me business cards, big deal. Like, it didn't seem like the rags to riches stories I had heard over time. I crafted that story and started telling it more. And I realized people were leaning in and they were interested. That this 17-year-old kid had the courage to start a business when no one around him, his friends wasn't doing it. No one in his family was doing it. And I realized that's what helped me connect with clients. That's what helped turn it around, is that first 5 years, Keisha Dior made $1 million. And I was just like, how can I help another client repeat this? More importantly, how can I charge more money? to do that. After that break, I pitched an interior designer, and I pitched him to do a same kind of concept, 3-part video series for his interior design firm. And I pitched him $15,000 to do it. So I went from $3,000 that I was charging Keisha Dior to $15,000 that I charged him. And I was nervous as hell. But literally after doing the presentation, his next words surprised me. He was just like, great, when do we get started? I realized, okay, this is the turning point. This is it. I've finally figured it out. And 15 grand it wasn't a lot of money, but it was a starting point for me to keep repeating that over and over with other clients. And today I charge $17,000 just for road mapping by itself. That isn't even a video project. And then the project itself starts at $150,000 and up. So yeah, it's been a wild journey. I'm 16 years in business now as we're recording this, and it's taken a lot of bumps on the head, twists and turns, but it's truly understanding. You say I talk a lot about storytelling. It's not just because it's my business. It's what has helped me grow too. It's truly understanding the power of telling your story in your business in order to help you grow.
I feel like there are so many threads we could pull on with everything that you just said, but the one that I want to pull on now is, can you expand a little bit on your experience of starting your business so young, kind of being the only entrepreneur that you know, and how that went, especially maybe in those first couple of years when you weren't that successful? What was that like?
It was hard, to be honest, because I mentioned already I'm the youngest of 10 children. So my family had no idea what I was doing. They thought it was a hobby. I didn't go to college. I may not have mentioned that. I went to 1 year of college and decided to drop out. Like, people ask me, what would you tell your younger self when you got started? I would say to myself, get out of your own way. I had too much pride in the beginning, thinking that I had to figure everything out on my own. So I never got help. I didn't even know what it meant to have a business coach or to go to filmmaking workshops or anything like that to get help. I just was like, I need to figure this out on my own. And because of that, those first 5 years that I struggled to make $20,000 a year, it was my own fault. And so if I go back, if I had to do it all over again, I'd tell myself, get out of my own way, because I didn't have to struggle for those first 5 years. But it was hard. It was very hard. I was very young. Even when I started going to workshops and conferences, I was still the youngest person in the room. I couldn't make a connection, and I couldn't understand if I was enough to do the work that I was wanting to do.
Yeah. And like another thread that sort of jumps out at me is I feel like a lot of people want to work with better clients, like ideal clients. And you've worked with people like Stefan Georgi, and I don't even know like all of the clients you've worked with, but I know Google and Coldwell Banker and like all kinds of like really impressive clients. You don't often hear people talk about how storytelling can be a way to position yourself as the kind of person that these clients want to work with. And so I guess I'm wondering what you learned about using stories to position yourself that way as you've worked with more of these kinds of clients over the years.
In 2014, I went to a leadership conference in Spokane, Washington. And I always knew leadership was important to me, because growing up, youngest of 10 children, you try to find your voice and you try to figure out, where do I fit into this family? And so I go to this leadership conference. I live in South Florida. And so coming back from this trip, I had the grand idea that I would take a Greyhound bus back home, because it would never happen again where I'd go from the Northwest to the Southeast. I get on this bus. It's a 3-day trip. By the second day, I'm completely miserable. We get to Chicago, Illinois. I had my phone off the entire time, but I turn back on my phone and I get this text message from my sister. And it says, call me back, it's urgent. This is July 2014. And I know at this point, I'm bracing myself because it's either mom or dad. At that point in 2014, my mom had been suffering from depression and attempted suicide. My dad had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. So I called my sister back, and unfortunately, it's dad. They found him unresponsive in the house. I take the first flight back home from Chicago, Illinois. My brother picks me up, and he comes with his daughter, my niece, Ayana. I hug my brother. We don't say a word. I hug my niece. We don't say a word, but I sit in the back seat with my niece. staring out the window because at this point I'm 25 years old and I never imagined I'd lose my father so young. And as I'm staring out the window, Ayana, my niece, says to me, "Uncle, why did Grandpa have to die?" And that question rang in my ear as we're doing funeral preparations, as we are figuring out what to do with the things in the house. And on August 9th, 2014, I, Jude Charles, the youngest of 10 children, ends up giving my father's eulogy. And it's in that moment that I realized leadership wasn't just a part of my purpose, it is my calling, and it's to lead through difficult moments, is to have the courage to lead through difficult moments. All right, so why did I go through that long drawn out story? It's because that is the opening story I use in road mapping. When I use it in road mapping, what I end it with is I am here to take you through this 6 to 8 hour road mapping strategy session, not because you're looking to craft your story, not even because you're looking to do a really amazing video. I'm here to help lead you through the process. And so what I've noticed is that positions me in a different way where, one, they trust me now in the first 5 minutes of our meeting. Even if they don't really know who I am, what I'm really about, I am breaking down the walls when I tell stories. And what I've noticed when I do that with clients, no matter how large they are, I've worked with Steve Harvey, I've worked with Google, I've worked with, like you said, Stephen Georgi, who's very successful in this copywriting space. But when I tell that story, it commands a level of respect that they probably didn't have before, and a level of connection. And that's really what storytelling is all about. It's about making a deep connection with someone so that they know who you are, not just the thing that you do. I'm not just a vendor to my client, I'm a trusted advisor. And that's what helps me command the fees that I command, is just being a leader. Your clients aren't paying you to do the work. They're paying you to lead them through the process. And when you understand that as a freelancer, when you understand that as an entrepreneur, it changes everything in your business because you show up differently.
What would you say to a freelancer who's sitting here and listening, like, Jude's a great storyteller. Of course, Jude can do this, but I can't go into a meeting and do something like that. I don't have good stories like that.
Everyone has a story to tell. If you are born, if you're alive, you have gone through experiences. They don't have to be as dramatic as me telling the story as my father passing away and what happened in that moment. But everyone has a story, and everyone has a story, a moment of frustration, a moment of embarrassment, even a moment that they never imagined would happen. Everyone has a story. Everyone has an experience that they've been through. And for me, the easiest way that I've found to bring these stories to meetings, the stories that will connect with my clients, is through this thing that I call a story bank. And what a story bank is, very simplest terms, is it's this journal that I use. And in the journal, I will write out stories of different things that's happened through my life. Everyone has a story. How I've gotten better at telling my own stories is that story bank. And the reason I call it a story bank is because, one, a story is about a very specific moment in time. Story is a buzzword that's gotten confusing over time. But bank is important because when you deposit money into a bank, the only way you can withdraw money is if you deposit it. So the only way you can withdraw the stories and actually start telling these stories is if you deposit them into this journal.
Can you expand on using stories and leveraging stories in a way that feels genuine? Because I'm not throwing shade at anyone in particular, but I think everyone feels this pressure to always be like telling a story in bits of their marketing, but it doesn't always come out. It feels like they're trying to tell a story just to tell a story because they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Or people don't, to your point, don't even know really what storytelling means exactly.
Yeah.
Because of the way that's been thrown around so much.
Yeah, it's interesting. The most genuine way to tell the story is you have to tell the story that's actually happened to you, or a story that you really connect with. If you're trying to force telling a story, it is going to come off, like you said, Ali, it's going to come off like I'm being forced to tell this story. Like, how does it come off genuine without it coming off slimy almost? I think it's just what I've personally seen is these are stories that either haven't happened to the person or they're stories they're not connected with. So I happen to tell stories of other entrepreneurs, but these are entrepreneurs I'm like fans of and I'm connected with. Or one of my favorite TV shows is called Billions. And I tell this story of one of the main characters, Chuck Rhodes, who goes to Washington Park to play chess. He's playing chess with this guy. The guy is the best player in Washington Park. So there's a crowd that forms. And Chuck is a lawyer. Like, that is his profession. He's a district attorney. And he's playing this guy, and he notices in one move, the guy steals 2 of his knights. The guy has just cheated, and Chuck is irate. And he wants to lean over and grab this guy and to teach him a lesson. So Chuck scans the crowd that is standing there looking, and he sees this young boy that's about 12 to 13 years old. He's like, this kid doesn't need to see such violence today. But that moment helped him reframe how to win. And so he got up, he dropped his queen, he got up, he gave up. He knew that this guy had cheated, but the guy had won with the cheat. And he handed the guy $10 for winning. But he leaned over, he said to him, I saw what you did. It takes a lot of skill to do what you just did, and to make sure that people didn't notice it. I could make your life a living hell, but instead, there's 2 things that's going to happen. 1, you're never going to do this again. But 2, you see that kid over there? The kid that's standing with his father? He's going to have a great time playing you. And what Chuck was really saying to him is you're going to let that 12-year-old kid win. Chuck found another way to win. Instead of seeking revenge, he found a way to give a 12-year-old kid confidence that'll probably last him a lifetime. But the lesson was find another way to win. The reason I love that is because I am a big believer and a big advocate of perspective. When I talk about, like, when you're telling someone else's story, you're telling a different story. The same passion and drive that I brought to that story, you have to bring to the story that you tell, so that it doesn't come off slimy. And I don't know, Allie, you tell me if that came off slimy, but I think it's the connection that you have to the story that really helps to drive the point home and to drive the lesson that you're looking to teach.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think something that you just illustrated beautifully that I think a lot of people miss is that, I don't know, they tell the story and then they leave people to like make the connection, because they're like, see, I'm going to tell you something and then I'm going to tell you a story, and they leave them to see how those 2 pieces connect to each other while they're moving on to the next thing. Whereas you're saying, okay, this is what I'm going to tell you. Now I'm going to tell you a story about it. And by the way, this is why it matters in the context of what I just told you.
Yeah, I think the lesson is always the biggest piece. You don't want to just tell the story just for the sake of telling a story. We all have those friends who just talk on and you have no idea where they're going with what they're saying. In my opinion, you wrap it up with a point. You wrap it up with the lesson that you took away, because someone else may take away a different lesson. But it's the lesson that you took away from it that helps make a difference in how someone else interprets it. And I think that's when you're looking to tell a story, you could always start with the end in mind. What's the lesson that I want to teach? Or what's the thing I want them to take away from this? Find another way to win. Look at this differently. Change your perspective.
We were chatting a little bit before we hit record about how burnout is a thing that we've all gone through. So I guess I wondered if you'd just chat a little bit about what that experience has been like in terms of just how you've experienced it, like how you recognized that it was something you've gone through and how you've decided, okay, this is how I'm going to deal with it.
I woke up October 10th, 2020, teeth clenched, heart racing. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move my body. And I had no idea what was happening. I felt paralyzed. And after 2 hours, finally able to move and get out of bed, I called my therapist, told him what was happening. And that was officially when I was diagnosed with burnout. I had never really known that I was burnt out up until that point, but there were signs of it. I remember that year is 2020, so the pandemic had already began and it was happening, but I was one of 5 people still on a plane traveling. But I remember by June of 2020, I started to resent the people who had time off, because everybody was off from work. Like, you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't go to the office, you couldn't fly. And although I was still making money, I started to resent the fact that I couldn't take time off. And that's when I think the sign started. But the other signs of it was that I lacked motivation. I didn't want to wake up and go to work. I didn't want to wake up and go fly to the next client. And so the signs were there. But the biggest thing I think is I started the business at 17, and I prided myself that I worked really hard. Once I figured out how the business could work, I did really well. And that was in my 20s, but I'm in my 30s now. And what worked in my 20s doesn't work in my 30s, but I never changed how I work. And that was the biggest thing. I had been taking breaks from work since 2013, and I would take November, December off, but November, it would take me a whole month to decompress from the work. because I would race to November. So January to October, I would go hardcore. And then November, December, or in November specifically, I would have to it would take me the whole month before I could feel relaxed and at ease. But if I'm honest, it even took me a while to accept burnout. I had tied the work that I do to me and my value. It was my identity. And I had to accept that, yes, although I can't work the same way I used to work, I'm still valuable. So I got diagnosed October of 2020. I didn't accept it until June of 2021 because I could not wrap my head around the fact that although I work differently, I'm still okay and I'm still valuable. And just because I can't work as hard as I used to work in my 20s doesn't mean I'm not valuable or I'm not a master of my craft. It just means you have to change the system and the process in which you work. And as we're recording this, I'm literally coming off of a sabbatical. I call it my sabbatical. I took a sabbatical June 2022. I will be taking another one in December of 2022, but it is the best thing I've ever done. Here's a crazy story of taking the June sabbatical. Right before Memorial Day weekend, I was filming with a client. She was having a 3-day conference and everybody's coming back from lunch. And my head of production, Jason, looks at me and he says, "We just got robbed." Now, we had walked into the center with 4 different cameras, 10 lenses, a bunch of other equipment too, but that's the main important equipment. Someone had walked into the room and stole 2 cameras, 8 lenses. So more than half of our equipment, over $20,000 worth. We're in the middle of a shoot. As the leader of all of this, I have to think about my team because it was the 4 of us there and how they're feeling. I have to think about updating the client and making sure she understands what's getting ready to happen because we're limited in what we could do. And then I have to think about filing a police report and trying to figure out how we're going to, because yes, luckily there were cameras in there, but are we going to even be able to get our equipment back? All of this is happening. Now, I dealt with it in the moment. My head of production, Jason, he originally had told the client, and I get why. He told the client, "Hey, it happened, but we're still going to be successful." And I had to stop him. And I was like, "Look, we're not going to be successful. More than half of our equipment got stolen. We're going to do the best that we can do, but we're not. What you were expecting is not what you're going to get." And the reason I did that is because when you're working with high-level clients, they don't like surprises. So she would have gotten the final product and would have been like, "Hey, what is this? This is not what I was expecting." So I had to be upfront with her. All of that happens, and I think the week I got back home, the weight finally hit me that, wait, we just got robbed of $20,000 worth of equipment. In my 16 years of business, this has never happened. I've never even so much as lost a lens or a microphone. But someone came in, and here's the worst part of the story. After the police report and the police had looked at the cameras, they said this guy was in the room for at least an hour scoping and watching us. So now there's a level of violation there. And the full weight of all this had hit me. And if I did not take a June sabbatical, no lie to you, I would have quit. I would have quit the entire business. The robbery happened on a Thursday. I went to see my therapist Tuesday. And what I went to see my therapist about was how I was going to walk away. Because I could not imagine continuing this, especially in a season. I probably haven't made this clear. I'm still going through burnout. Like I haven't recovered completely. And then to have this happen, but because I took the June sabbatical, because I took a break, because I was able to breathe. I said this before we started recording, but I'm a big advocate for creative entrepreneurs specifically taking a break, even if it's 3 weeks. You probably can't do the 2 months that I do, but even if it's 3 weeks at a time, or I actually saw this recently, a guy talked about, I forget who it was, but it's another popular entrepreneur who talked about he takes every 7th week off. So he works for 6 weeks, and then the 7th week, no matter when it happens, he takes that off. And I thought that was fascinating too. I've never tried that, but that's fascinating too. But again, you find a different way to win, right? There's always a different way to do something, but you have to take a break. There's just so much happening in this world and so much happening in real life that being a creative entrepreneur is only a small piece of it. And yes, we are blessed to do the work that we do. We are blessed to bring home money for our family and to be able to enjoy it, but take a break. It's okay.
So shifting gears from this, one other thing that we've talked about is that you have gone on a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
A lot. And it obviously shows in the skill with which you're able to tell stories. I guess I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about why you decided to lean into guest podcasting and like how it's helped you as a storyteller.
So 2018 was TCC IRL's first event, March, I think, of 2018. And Rob Marsh met me there. We had never spoken before then, but he met me there. And he said to me, he wanted me to be on stage next year. And I was just like, okay. But he had never heard me speak. But the reaction from it, I realized there was a tug and a pull that was happening where I needed to step outside of the shadows. And that was the very first time I stepped outside of the shadows. As we're recording this, I forget the number now, but I've definitely been on at least 100 podcasts. And what I've learned from it more than anything is by sharing my story, my journey through entrepreneurship, it's helping others. My mission in life is to lead and empower entrepreneurs to have relentless, unwavering courage. And the more I share my stories of courage, the more I show them that sometimes courage starts with a simple step, just taking the next step. Honestly, like, not to be morbid, but I think about it all the time. If I were to die today, I have left a library of stories to help entrepreneurs for a lifetime. There isn't a financial thought behind it other than, yes, maybe I'll sell a book or I'll tell someone about the book that I wrote. But truthfully, I do this because I enjoy it. I still do this throughout burnout because it doesn't burn me out. But to be able to meet different people and to share my story and to show them that there's a different way to do something, it's worth it.
Taking risks is clearly important to you, but what would you say to the freelancer who can't get out of their own way in that regard?
Take small risk is what I would say. Coming onto this podcast today is a small risk, in my opinion. For me, at least, it's a small risk. For other people, it wouldn't be. It's a small risk because of two things. One, this isn't live. So if it was live, it would be a much bigger risk. But if it's not live, so I could easily say to both of you, hey, I don't like what I did today. Don't use it. So it's a small risk in the sense that it's only between us three. The other thing, too, it's a small risk because I may never see the responses from people that have listened to this. So I don't have to go look at the comments and see what people thought of it. So yeah, I just think you take the small risk. Maybe you don't speak in front of 200 or 2,000 people, you speak in front of 5. And at the end of it, you realize you didn't die. So you do it again. And then maybe next time you do 50. And then next time you do 100, right? Like I didn't take these big jumps. They were small steps that I took little by little. I talk about road mapping. The very first time I charged for road mapping, I believe was $400. It might have been $400 or $500 because I didn't even believe people would pay for road mapping. I think the third person that paid me for road mapping decided not to move forward with the project. But I went back to him and I said, hey, why didn't you move forward with the project? And he said something to me. He was like, I'm the guy that if you put a Mercedes in front of me or an Audi in front of me, I'm going to always choose an Audi. His point was that he's always going to go with the cheaper option. So he went and found someone else to do the project cheaper. But he said, I'd pay for road mapping again. Light bulb went off in my head that, oh, this is valuable outside of just putting together a video project. So the next client, I charged $1,000 for road mapping. And then the next one, $3,000. And then the next one, $5,000. And until it's today, $17,000. So you take these small risks, you take these small steps. You don't get there overnight. No matter what anyone tells you, no one is an overnight success. Take the small risk, whatever risk may mean to you, but realize you didn't die. And then the last piece I'll leave with is I have this folder in my phone called the confidence folder. It's in my photo album. And anytime I get a compliment, anytime I get a testimonial from a client, anytime no matter what it is, I screenshot it, I put it in that folder. The day that I feel like, oh, I can't take this next big step because, I don't know, I'm scared or whatever, I look back at that folder and I realize I've done it before. So every small risk that you take, capture it, whatever way you need to capture it, and remind yourself you've done it before. That's what helps you take the next small risk.
There's a lot of freelancing and entrepreneurship advice floating around on the internet. Is there a piece of advice that you just don't buy into, that doesn't sit right with you?
It's a fascinating question. There is no one way to success. Even my way to success isn't going to work for everyone. That's one thing. But the second thing is not everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur or a freelancer. And you have to come to terms with that. Entrepreneurship, I say this all the time, you have to be crazy to be an entrepreneur. For the things that you take on, you have to be crazy to continue to go through it over and over again. So I do not believe everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur. I do not buy into, if you're not building your own dream, you're building someone else's. That could be your dream too. Maybe your dream is to be the support system for someone else, to know that's the way you make an impact. So I think the biggest one is just I don't buy into trying to make people feel bad about not being an entrepreneur. Everyone's dream looks different. Someone else's dream could be to work for someone else, not to take on the risk of running their own company so that they can be there for their family. Because entrepreneurship takes a lot of time. If you're not careful, if you're not intentional, you could work 80 hours a week and never see your kids grow up. But I think that's the biggest one, is that entrepreneurship is not for everyone. And I will never make someone feel bad for not being an entrepreneur. That may not be their dream. We all get to choose what our dream is. Just because my dream is to be an entrepreneur doesn't mean someone else is less than.
I wish I could like this 50 times. Unfortunately, we're not in a likable setting right now. If people want to learn more about you or follow you, where can they find you online?
I'm most active social media wise on Twitter. And then the other place is my newsletter, the Dramatic Leverage newsletter, where I talk about the business side of storytelling and I talk about leadership. I'm in there responding all the time. And that's the best place to connect with me, judecharles.co/newsletter. That's where I continue the conversation and we keep talking about these bigger ideas and how to play the game that you want to play.
Thanks for listening to the Freelanceology podcast with your hosts, Ali Goulet and Chris Collins. If you want to hear more episodes like this, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts and leave us a review. You can find more information about the show and sign up to get email updates at freelanceology.io.